There is a moment in Christian caregiving that almost no one recognizes when it happens. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like a crisis. It looks like inclusion. Your adult kids say, "Mom, we feel out of the loop." So you open the loop. You start to share more. You ask them for their input. You ask for help with something temporary, and suddenly the language changes. Your children start to say things like, "This may not be safe," or "Mom, are you sure this is wise?" And maybe it is time to consider placement. However, nothing medical has changed. There's been no shift in the diagnosis, but something structural changed. Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome back to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast for Bible-believing families who are learning to recognize the decision thresholds dementia forces into the room silently. Today, we're not talking about whether taking a short trip as a caregiver is reasonable. We're looking at what happens when transparency quietly shifts the decision authority, and how to recognize when you are standing at an authority threshold instead of a safety crisis. If you need help identifying whether you're facing a care problem or a decision shift, you can schedule a caregiving threshold review at thinkdifferentdementia.com or click in the link in the show notes. Now let's walk through today's episode. You are a spousal caregiver whose uncle passed away, and you're wanting to leave town for 4 days to attend a family memorial where all your cousins are going to be and attend your most beloved uncle's funeral. You are responsible for lining up the coverage. You have explored paid caregivers, and you have not one, but 2 backup plans. As a mom, you have considered asking your adult kids for help. So you do. And they responded carefully. "Mom, that is a very big ask. I may not be able to take off of work. I'm nervous about what Dad is going to do without you there." And then these words, "Maybe it is time to consider placement." Now, on the surface, this sounds like a coverage problem. It isn't. This is an authority problem that is disguised as a safety conversation. Now, what does she think is happening? What does Mom think is happening? She thinks, "How do I arrange enough help?" She might be thinking, "Why won't my kids step in and help?" And she's definitely thinking, "Why does this feel harder than it should be?" So she is solving the coverage gap. She plans more appropriately. She asks for more reassurance. There's contingency planning and contingency thinking. However, her tension does not ease. And that is the signal. When increased coverage planning does not calm the system, the issue isn't coverage. It's not a coverage gap. What's actually happening in this situation? The sons are not answering the coverage question. They are actually evaluating whether Mom should be making this decision at all. That is the tell. The conversation has shifted from "How do we help you keep Dad at home?" to "Should you be the one carrying and deciding about this level of risk?" However, nobody is saying that directly, and the structure has already shifted. There is a repeatable pattern. It is not unique. It happens all the time. I see this every single week when I work with my clients. The spouse is very competently caregiving. The adult children, however, are uncomfortable in watching, understandably, uncomfortable watching the inevitable decline of their dad. So they interpret their discomfort through the lens of safety concern. And safety becomes the lever. They say things like, "We're worried about you. We're worried about dad. Mom, this doesn't seem safe. He needs more help than you can provide." Now, granted, sometimes safety is a real concern. Or sometimes your adult children's anxiety can escalate the problem. And then the conversation about placement enters the room. Not because there was a clinical change in either you as the caregiver or the person living with dementia. There's been no threshold that has been crossed. But because placement will resolve the tension in the family. Placement will transfer the authority from mom to the facility, and placement will stabilize the adult children's anxiety. If the professionals are responsible, it removes mom from the actual decision-making structure, and nobody is saying that out loud. And the structure has shifted. Then the hidden decision becomes not who can watch dad for 4 days, but who is recognized as the decision maker while dad remains at home. That is the threshold. The memorial trip has not created this particular issue. The memorial trip has exposed the fact that the children do not actually believe that mom should be making these decisions alone. They believe the moment they asked for further input to be able to give their advice, that then allows them the default setting of being the one who decides. Not co-decision makers. Mom is the decision maker, not the adult sons. She is competent. So why does this matter for us as Christian families? In many Christian marriages, we have a covenantal mindset, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. Ephesians 5 verse 25 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." There is a belief that care inside the marriage carries moral weight, and it does. However, you cannot assume that your children necessarily think the same way that you do about your marriage. Adult children may have secular worldviews or think differently and may be operating from a risk minimization perspective. They're trying to necessarily balance all of their concerns for you, their concerns for dad, by minimizing whatever risk, reducing whatever exposure is there, making sure that care transfer is earlier so that the professionals can take over, but neither side actually stop and say, maybe this is a difference in worldview. And it often is. When your adult children leave and cleave to their spouses, they start a whole new unit. And their families and their values and their decisions may look vastly different than yours. I'm not saying don't consider their input. I'm just saying be cautious as to whether they are trying to inadvertently take over the decision making for you, particularly if, like my client, you are a competent and skilled caregiver with the resources to provide for care at home. Often when a worldview difference comes in, it brings unspoken authority shifts and results in escalation of conflict. So 1 Corinthians 14 verse 40 says, "But all things should be done decently and in order." We need to ensure that the order is recognized. There is an order in this family, not just assumed. Mom has the decision-making ability. So if this is happening to you, don't necessarily start with the coverage gap. Start by recognizing what has just actually happened. Ask yourself, am I being recognized by my children as the primary decision maker so that the care can remain at home? Because until that is clarified, all of the coverage gaps, all of the logistical conversations are going to remain tense. Clarity will sound like this. This is my plan. I am going away. Here's the coverage. Here's the phone numbers. Here's who's going to step in and help. I appreciate your concern, and placement is not being evaluated right now. I am able to do this. This is only a 4-day trip. And when the clinical threshold changes, I will initiate the conversation about placement myself. I am responsible for these decisions while your dad is at home. I'm responsible for these decisions when your dad is perhaps in the future placed in a facility. These are my decisions as a spouse. I am competent to make these decisions. Very calm, very clear, not defensively, authority without escalation. And that is wise stewardship. So, what happens if you don't name this particular problem? When this shift in structure goes unnamed, every future decision that you have as a wife for your husband now is going to become negotiable. Everything is going to be open for debate. Every time placement will be introduced earlier and earlier because your children have decided that that is their only viable solution, not because your kids are being malicious, but because they believe that they actually have the authority and the responsibility to make this decision. And when that happens, when your responsibility and authority as the decision maker are separated, instability will grow in this family structure. Now, dementia does not only increase physical and cognitive care needs, it rearranges the authority inside a family. And if you don't see that happening, you may be spending months arguing about caregivers, concerned about safety and logistics, when your real issue might be who decides, who gets to decide. Now, if you have sensed that this shift is happening to you while listening today, it is not a small thing. This is a structural threshold, and thresholds have to be identified before they escalate. If you need help clarifying who holds the decision authority in your current season and what would actually justify escalating to placement, schedule a caregiving threshold review at thinkdifferentdementia.com or go to the link in the show notes. Not to shut down the conversation with your kids, but to stabilize your structure before it destabilizes you.